Dobry wieczór, schönen guten Abend, good evening. Welcome to SalonInMitte. I'm very happy to have you here again. We have tonight a very special guest. He's no politician, even not an economist, which we are talking about usually in this room. He's a famous representative of modern architecture. I'm very happy to welcome with you Mr. Libeskind. Mr. Libeskind was born, ladies and gentlemen, 1946 in Poland, in Łódź, and in his young years he was not so much interested in architecture but in the music. As a teenager he was a rising star of Polish young music. He played accordion and was a real virtuoso of that instrument. He began his interest for architecture began a little bit later, after he left Poland by end of 50s, moved to Israel and later on to the United States. And since then, the name Libeskind is associated not with the music anymore, but with the architecture. Mr. Libeskind is author of many impressive buildings all over the world. Some of them are also in Germany. The most known is, of course, Jewish Museum in Berlin. One of the most famous is One World Trade Center, completed last year in New York, which replaced Twin Towers, destroyed in the terrorist attack of 9/11 14 years ago. Mr. Libeskind is in a very close and long relation with Germany. He used to live here in this country and to teach at the High School for Architecture in Karlsruhe. He stays in touch also with his home country, with Poland, and designed a beautiful tower in the center of Warsaw called the Wing, or the Sail, which is, I think, very successfully competing with the Palace of Culture, which is placed in the direct neighborhood to it, built in 1955 as a gift of the Soviet Union to the People's Republic of Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, our discussion will be moderated by two journalists, the Polish Joanna Podolska, who works for daily Gazeta Wyborcza, he's older, and is participating on many initiatives aimed at preservation of Jewish heritage of the city of Łódź. And from Germany, Nikolaus Bernau, who is writing on old and new architecture for many German papers and was already awarded with many important prizes. But before we start, I'd like to give the floor to Maya Feitke, who is the president of Ambassadors Club, with which we prepared together this event. Maya, thank you very much for fantastic cooperation. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, on behalf of the Ambassador Club, I would like to welcome you cordially to this great event. This is not only a pleasure, it's an honor to have you, Mr. Libeskind, with us tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Our great thanks, mine personally, goes to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Poland, Dr. Jerry Margansky. When I told him Mr. Libeskind comes, he did not hesitate one moment. He says, I will do it. Thank you very, very much. What would be a great event without a great sponsor? Our thanks goes to the sponsor, Dr. Nikolaus, Ziegert Immobilien. Thank you very much for supporting the club at this great event. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.
Now I ask you to take your place on the sits on the stage, Mr. Libeskind, and our moderators. The floor belongs to you. Please start.
We're going?
Is it functioning?
Yeah, I think the technique is going. Yours as well? I think so. Yeah?
Okay.
Yes, yes, no? Okay, perfect. So, His Excellency, just introduced us. So, half of my part is done, which is really bad for me. I'm prepared for a long speech on Libeskind. Joanna is now introduced as well. I'm introduced myself. So I just only have to do one technical thing because we have a very hard competition tonight. I know the play between Dortmund and Bayern München. Maybe somebody else will want to follow. It doesn't matter, but please switch off the sound. That would be very kind. And yeah, I think we can start immediately. The thing is, how we thought the whole process will go, that we're talking Mr. Libeskind, having very indecent questions prepared for about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, we will see. And then we will open to all of you. So I think maybe you have a lot of questions. And we will try to answer some of them, maybe. We'll be seeing how we can do that. Maybe just a short thing for introducing why I immediately were fascinated to do this evening. It was specifically because there is a small generation gap between Mr. Libeskind and me. And so we as students at the beginning of the 90s, as architecture students, were absolutely fascinated. In that time, maybe more by your models and your plans and your drawings than on your, because of your buildings.
And
there weren't any.
So at that point.
And we were also very fascinated. I really remember that very, very deep. In the beginning of the 1990s, you held some lectures at the Berlin Technical University. But there is some guy who's coming from Poland, who has been raised up in Israel and in the United States, can obviously understand German. Is talking, nobody knew how many languages, but we assumed a lot. And we all asked ourselves, in Germany, usually you speak 2 languages, if you're happy 3 or 4. How important is language for architecture?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for coming. I'm delighted to be with my client, Mr. Ziegert, and the wonderful cooperation I've had, and of course in this hotel, which I know almost as well as my home. But to answer the question about language, you need language to communicate, but architecture itself is a language. It has to communicate with its own means. Architecture doesn't use words, cannot use words. It has to use a different sense of communicating. But it is a language of proportions, a language of time, a language of sound, a language that creates an atmosphere that definitely communicates directly to us. And in that sense, that's what I love about architecture. It crosses languages, crosses religions, ethnicities, nationalities. It's a universal sense of being in this world. So yes.
Is that maybe the reason that you just told us, Joanna brought that your biography with you? I think there are relatively few countries in which you are so popular, like in Germany, but your biography is much more sold in a totally different country.
Well, it's true. My book is a true bestseller in China. I have no idea why, but I have now written a serious introduction to, the 10th edition or whatever, which brings the book up to date, because people want to know, okay, this is already some time ago, how is the story developing of architecture, the kind of adventure of life? So, yes, China has many people, but it's a creative country with a lot of interest, I think, that goes beyond just architects, who are, it's about people, what people can do, what the world can be about the memory, about the future, yes.
Well, why China? Do you have some idea
Yes.
why they are fascinated by? And
Well, China's an ancient society, as you know. It's a society also in a process of changing, in a rapid transformation, not always easy for people, for governments, and there is a longing everywhere in the world that where I go. There is a longing to be free, the longing for liberty. I think that's part of a fascination of somebody who, like myself, didn't start in the corporate world, didn't start with a career. He didn't start with, rich parents. He didn't start in sort of the predictable corner of something, but kind of stumbled onto a path that is different. I think that might be of interest to people.
But in some way, Chopin is popular and known everywhere, but the most popular in Japan, so who knows, yes. We met 10 years ago, more or less, in Łódź. I would like to underline that I am from Łódź, so I am from the same city where you was born. And I remember first time when we went, you said that you don't speak Polish. And very soon, in few minutes, you changed language and you were speaking in Polish. And I remember also you wrote in your book that in Warsaw, during your first big meeting, you said, I'm sorry, I'm not able to speak to you in Polish, but after you couldn't stop. And you wrote in book that your brain didn't want to come back to English. You wanted to follow, and you said, you wrote that in that moment you understood how much how much you have from the Polish culture.
That's certainly true. That's certainly, and I still count in Polish. How strange. I left Poland when I was 11, 12 years old, but when I count in my mind, you count in the language of the country where you were born. And so Poland certainly is very close to my heart, and I used to speak a lot of Polish, as I mentioned to you, with my parents, with a community of immigrants in New York, certainly in Israel. But as the generation has gone, it's more difficult for me to find speakers of Polish. But now I'm happy that I have a project in Warsaw. Whenever I go to Warsaw, I can definitely use Polish. And maybe one of these days I could actually lecture even on a technical subject. It's a challenge, but I can do it.
Is it a route which you still have to Poland? What you say, I'm not just only an Israeli, American architect or an international architect, but I have specifically a route to Poland.
Definitely. How can you not have a route in Poland if your family goes so deep is so deeply implicated in Polish history in Poland for hundreds of years? I'll give you a very good example. One of my favorite writers is Bruno Schulz. And I had a beautiful translation, an English translation. And then I suddenly decided, why am I reading this in English? And I did get, when I was in Poland, the original Polish text. And I actually read the book with incredible enjoyment. It wasn't that easy because Schulz's language in Polish is more than a 13-year-old, when I left. But it was fantastic. Yes, I'm very, Polish music, Polish literature, Polish thought, Polish history is definitely very much a part of who I am. And certainly very much part of what my parents were and where they came from.
Your father was kind of a storyteller, and your grandfather, Chaim, was also a storyteller. As I understood, he was a person who was entertainer during the wedding and some other traditional Jewish events. Do you remember any stories? Your father, Nachman, he did a testimony for Ivo, for Jewish Institute. So do you remember any story?
Well, it is very interesting. My father, one day in New York, I bought a book called Jewish Folklore, Jewish Myths. I have a number of those kind of books. And I was flipping through a book, and it's interesting stories of different topics, ghosts, and the book, and all this. And suddenly, I was reading a story, and on the bottom was Nachman Libeskind, my father. And I inquired of my father, and it happened to be that in the 1920s, the Yiddish newspaper had a competition to tell a story that your father told you, and then it was published in the Yiddish paper. And he was one of the winners. Strangely, this story found its way to Ivo, the Yiddish Institute of Vilna, came to New York. Some researcher found the story in the archives, and it was published in this English book in translation. And I read the story, and I have to tell you, it is a story that depends on Yiddish, because then I got the Yiddish text from Ivo. They were very nice to find it for me, because it's a kind of Dadaistic story. It's about things happening in an irrational way, but it's a Yiddish kind of algorithm of words, of letters that leads you to a very unpredictable journey that is a kind of fantasy. So yes, and I didn't really know till much later in my father's life that his father was a storyteller. He was a professional storyteller. He went from, you know, with his few belongings from village to village, telling stories. And I said, oh my God, this is amazing.
It is what I asked you. Did you visit this small shtetl where was your grandfather? So from Przedbusz for a Polish people.
I think I was in Przedbusz many, many years ago, but I didn't appreciate it. It was only later when I learned more about Przedbusz. It's that little town, a little suburb of Łódź.
No,
Which
it's
itself is a
about
suburb.
40 kilometers from Łódź, but it's nice, small city.
It's a village, yes.
So
Village?
your father appreciated the past, and your mother didn't want to leave her memories. She fired the memories just before she died.
Yes.
So, my question is, you wrote many times about your father, where your father was full of rainbows, but he was a kind of a rainbow. Do you feel it as well, that you in some way fulfill his dreams about the world?
Well, I was lucky that both of my parents, despite the fact that they were survivors of horrible terrors and horrible years of fear and destruction, were actually people who had an open mind to the world. They were not people who hid their past. They were people who looked forward. They were optimists. Now, they may have hid their past, but from us, from their children, but not in the way they appeared to us. And so they were full of light, definitely. Even my mother was a very different personality from my father, was full of life, full of the future. And I think that's, in a way, it's a very Jewish thing, because it's kind of the character, I think, of Jewish people too often is talked about in defensive or negative terms, but Jews really basically celebrate life. You know, whatever happens, it's about the joys that life brings.
So maybe last question about the family thing. You always underline in your book that your mother was a very brave person, that she was fighting even in New York with people who are not good, leading the people in the factory. Are you brave? Because of her in architecture?
I have to tell you, my mother was one of the bravest people. She didn't fear anything. She didn't care about employment. She didn't care about, you know, doing things that... She didn't care about what grades I got in school. She said, you know, even if you get a good grade, it doesn't really mean much. It's just a reward of an authority. She had a tremendous skepticism about all authority. She had an anarchic streak in her. Which is not anarchic politically, but I would say anarchic Hasidically. It's a spiritual freedom, and in that sense, I learned a lot from her. I learned not to be too, you know, eager to get compliments, to be too eager to please, to be too eager to follow established norms. She was fantastic, a great teacher, as was my father.
And so your mother was from Warsaw, and your first project in Poland was just few hundred meters from a place where she grew up.
That's right. How ironic that my first project in Warsaw is just a few, it's on Złota, Złota 44, and my mother grew up in Twarda. So it's just around the corner, and it's ironic that in this area, which was a great neighborhood, now my building is growing.
How was it after leaving Poland? Did your parents tell you a lot about the Polish history and Polish culture, and also, so which languages you spoke at home? Polish or Yiddish or Ivrit or English?
We spoke all those, and my mother, I remember saying that, you know, at the end she confused all languages, Polish, Hebrew, Yiddish, English. It was all mixed like this, and it's true, because when we came to Israel, we spoke Hebrew. You know, in New York, Hebrew was not as useful as Yiddish, for sure. Then we learned English. And of course, Polish was very useful as well with many people. So yes, I think that's kind of the background of acquiring, part of the culture. And Polish culture is deeply implicated. Yiddish culture is also part of Polish culture as well. How could understand all those incredible books and texts without knowing where they were written, the context of literature, and of course the language itself.
Was it memorized as a lost culture, or
no,
memorized as a living culture? Which
no, always living.
Somebody left behind.
No, my parents, as I said, were future-oriented. They were optimists. They never talked about something irretrievable, something gone. Of course, their families were gone, their loved ones were gone, but they never had that streak of sentimentality and nostalgia for the gone. They were realists. Otherwise, they would not have been immigrants twice in their lives, and being able to establish themselves. And it's very hard to be immigrant with kids when you have no resources, when you have no professions, when you just come to the shore with nothing. And I think back, would I have been, would anybody today be this brave, come with nothing? We look at it, Syrian refugees or refugees, that's kind of who they were, in some way, with nothing, trying to make a life for themselves, for their families, and for the future.
Did you do you remember these things when you left America in 1989 to Berlin, and so for about 14 years? I mean, it's a long time and quite important period in your life. You had your first two big projects, or 3 or 4 big projects at the end. And there were 14 years, very heavy debates. You had really to fight in Berlin. It wasn't very easy, I think, from an outsider point of view. From a student's point of view, out there is one of our heroes. He's fighting against stupid Berlin bureaucracy. But, so, did you feel that doing again something which my parents have done as well? So deciding for myself.
Well, I have to say it's more than my parents. It's also my wife and partner Nina, because without her I would not really be able to do these things anyway. But I have to say there is that streak of something that comes from your home. It's not something you learn in a university. It's not something you can take a course in. It's a course of life. And even though you yourself don't live that exact life, you have echoes of that life in everything, in the gestures of, the way your mother picks up a cup of tea, the way your father looks out of the window, the way they move. So history is much more complicated than just the words written on a text. It's really kind of deeper history, which is embodied in people's life.
So in which sense really this history, your past, your identity influence the art, your architecture?
I think probably totally. I never really thought about it like a philosopher reflecting on, where my ideas come from. But if I think about it,
thick books.
Well, I write
quite complicated.
I write so much, but really they must come from all my experiences, and especially not to be underestimated is your childhood experiences when you're 13, 15. Before you become 18, many of these experiences form your view of how you see reality, how you see politics, how you see the world itself. So to answer your question, definitely, much of my world comes. I think often, go back to Łódź, go back to Tel Aviv, go back to the shore, go back on the train, go back, and I've had this feeling again and again as I come back to Israel, come back to Poland. These are not, or Berlin, these are still home. Even though I don't physically live here, they are still part of my home, and I consider them home. Sometimes people ask me, so when did you leave Berlin? And in a way, I never left Berlin. You can't leave Berlin. Once you're here, you are not ever going to leave.
But that's the reason I don't know how much you interfere, for instance, in public and building affairs in Tel Aviv or New York. We knew it, but you're very strong in your positions to Berlin architecture politics, town planning politics. Quite often so. I would say generally every second year there's a big interview in the harsh competition newspaper, harsh speak mostly, not in the Berliner Zeitung, they're really playful. But anyhow, so there's every second year you say, hey, this is not going well, this is, I would have other ideas. This coming also from this idea, I'm still home here, it's my town.
Sure. If you love a city as I do Berlin, if you love a city as I do Warsaw, if you love a city as I do New York, you have to fight for what you believe. That doesn't mean it comes easy. It doesn't mean anybody gives you something on a golden platter. But you have to stand for what you believe. And it's not meaningless. It's full of meaning for, if you're a believer. And I think you have to believe in something that goes beyond a job, beyond the commission, beyond the building, beyond the success that you can sort of foretell. But, I'm not shy in Tel Aviv. I'm now in presenting some very important projects both in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. I'm not shy about saying what I think for a kind of critique, what is needed in the city, what is needed to make the city really beautiful, what is important for the social sense of a city. So I think every city, that's what architecture is. Architecture is not just building a building. I mean, that would be kind of a Bernau profession. It's about society, it's about the atmosphere of a street, the atmosphere of how people think. Think about it, sometimes you build something very small and you can have a big impact on how people think about it. You don't have to build the biggest building in the world to make an impact. Sapphire is, in my view, something like that. It's not a huge building, it's on a corner lot in a typical great, Chaussee-strasse, a great street.
And a perfect address to the Secret Service.
And it's a perfect address for many reasons. But, even something like this, I think that's maybe even more than just a big edifice. Because first of all, it has to do with everyday life of people. Second of all, that probably has the more power than any institutional power can ever provide. And it can have a real, positive sense for people in the city themselves. Lucky enough to live in a building, or just passing it by and thinking about their own window, their own bed.
It was quite interesting that nearly at the same time, I would say, maybe where there were 4 or 6 weeks between the Dorian Kohlhaas, and you both said, was nearly the same words, if I really would start again architecture, I would try to build most efficient social housing. What you would think, what could that be today?
Well, I didn't build the CCTV headquarters in Shanghai. I believe in social issues. I'm not a fellow traveler just waiting for opportunities. I believe that architecture is a social art, and whatever you undertake has to have that as part of its really the true horizon. It's not just talking about it. It's being involved in it in a true sense.
And do you believe in democracy in architecture?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I believe in it, and I'm one of the true proponents, because all my projects, as long as people get involved, it's great for my project. When the politicians take over, that's more difficult. But as long as normal people, not architects or not specialists, that happened to me many times in many different projects.
So I know just when we have gone to Berlin Jewish Museum, the members of the staff there were quite fascinated to work together, not just only with an architect, that was one thing, but with an architecture who has open ears and who sometimes listen to what their ideas on planning is. But how you, for instance, if you have a housing project, which at least is built for people who you cannot know them, and definitely you cannot know them in the people who are living there 50 years. So how to construct a democratic atmosphere for architecture?
That's a really good question. You asked really a profound question. First of all, let me say, I never think of people as users of the building. Here's a statistical user, an average user of a room, a user of a window, a user of a door. I just don't think that way. I think because, first of all, I don't think architecture as a commodity. Even though it's an object, you can see space defined. I never considered it something like a car, or a washing machine, or some computer, or something like that, or airplane. All the metaphors that were used to construct architecture in the 20th century. I think of it as a place, and place connected beyond the visible aspect to every human being, whether whoever they are, wherever they come from. So I don't work on some sort of a checklist of opinions. Everybody needs good light in a room. Everybody needs a proportion to sit, to stand. Everybody needs the right acoustical environment in their home. So that's part of it.
How to bring this to social issues? I mean, if you have poor people, is it possible to build this for poor people as well? With the language of Libeskind?
Well, I've just done it. It's not yet approved, but you know, I have to tell you the story. We were in China. My client is a very well-known industrialist. He's commissioned me to do actually the first privately funded museum of Chinese history in Wuhan, Zhangjiang Museum. And he has also built an ideal town with, you know, famous architects from around the world that are under the museum.
Wuhan as well?
No, Yangzhou, near Hangzhou. And we were walking through this, and he was asking, what would I like to build in this beautiful, beautiful city? And there were a lot of people on the streets cleaning the streets. It looked like, you know, hundreds of people with white, with brooms, and it was like a gated community somewhere in the, you know, Beverly Hills. And the question was asked, where do these people live? And then there was a complete silence. No answer, and I thought this was a real faux pas, you know, because that was a wrong thing to ask. 6 months later, I was called by my client, and he said, you know, I've been thinking for these last months what you asked, and it's clear that these people don't live in our city. They live in villages 3 hours away. But if this is supposed to be a good city, they should live in the city. So can you design housing for, you know, people who sweep the streets, who clean the latrines, who are on the building sites for very low cost? It gave me a cost that made my hair, it's not that long, but it was standing on edge. But I thought it was a very worthwhile project, and I have done it. I have met the exact costs. Believe me, it's not barrack housing. It's very dignified. It's a whole community. It's not high rise. It's high density, but not high rise. It's not skyscraper. And I'm hoping that it will get approval from the government, of course, as a kind of model of the fact that the dignity of a working person, it doesn't matter who you are. Everybody should have access to a beautiful place to live.
So you fulfill your dream from your time of your academic life. You wrote in your book that you wanted, you asked your lecturer to let you do something for poor people.
Yes, that's true.
So when it will be possible to see it?
Well, you know, in China it's not so easy. It has to go through a set of approvals of different agencies. But I'm very hopeful that it will get approval and will be built as a, you know, the first step to demonstrate that you don't need to build big factories, big infrastructure to produce prefabricated concrete. You don't have to think in that way. You can take each locality and create a kind of sustainable environment by using local materials, local techniques to create something that is cost effective and also something that actually I would like to live in. That was my goal. If not the head of the party, at least I would like to live in a room which is 30 square meters with 3 other people. Maybe members of my family, maybe friends. That was my goal. How would I feel living in such a place? That's what I'd like to design. And I suggested many things, including built-in furniture, because there are 4 different workers who don't know each other. They have to live in a room which is less than maybe 30 square meters. They have to have a kitchen, they have to have a bathroom, they have to have some place for privacy, but also some place to get together. And also the social space outside has to have a garden, has to have some terrace, has to have some socially beautiful signal that we are not alone here, we share the world with other people. And I think if I'm lucky, this will be built.
Would it accept of the density of living inside a Chinese building?
Well, I think we have to all get used to living in smaller apartments. You know, the trick is not to learn to live in bigger spaces, but...
Sorry, this is a very routine question. How big is your apartment?
It's actually not very big. How many square meters does it live? About 180 square meters. It's not, you know, I also use it as a place to work. Partially, it's not huge. I'm very lucky to live there.
Sorry, didn't want to interrupt.
No, so you know, I've never forgotten a beautiful line. If you read one of the most fascinating books, which is the Notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, 2 volumes of them, the writings. Leonardo da Vinci says that if you're going to be an artist, try to find a small place to paint. Don't try to find a large studio. And he connects it with overcoming laziness. He said, you know, big spaces tend to give you too many kind of things. So I think you asked about the future of housing. I think small apartment can be very beautiful. Of course, big apartments are fantastic. I wish I had a larger one.
If you have possibility, if somebody give you the situation, like for Haussmann in Paris once, what would you do?
You know, I designed the city in the center of Seoul, Korea, but I didn't do what Haussmann did. You know, Haussmann's, as you know, planning is kind of today appears to us so beautiful, so fantastic, but it was an idea of a certain kind of authority, an authoritarian idea of how to connect parts of Paris, how to clean parts of Paris. My idea in Seoul, Korea was not that. It's to use the existing neighborhoods to weave them together, to give more green space, to create neighborhoods that have their own identity. So it was a very different idea from the idea that let's erase the city in a certain way, let's evacuate the city and create kind of a new structure. More, I would call my method more homeopathic. It's not the kind of wild surgical things that you have to take the organs out and put artificial organs in. It's more, what can you do with the limited means? If you're not working for an authoritarian or a dictator or a king, you think, you know, what can really be done which is positive? And luckily, Korea is a country that is, you know, a democracy. So you have to have the consensus. The same is true in New York. New York, you cannot just do what you draw. You have to be able to draw what can also effectively bring people together in a very, very divisive social environment, economic, political. I've had, you know, 3 mayors. I've had 4 governors of New York and New Jersey. I've had 6 or 7 heads of Port Authority of New York. I've had many different developers. So you have to kind of be flexible.
But if you're looking for Napoleon III as an emperor,
I'm not.
And no, you're not. no, you're not. But if you're looking for him as an emperor, then his head of architecture, Osman, and the beautiness of Paris. I mean, Paris has some reason to be one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I would say the most beautiful. But if you see the extreme success of these radical politics of architecture happening in the 1850s, 1870s, is it not a role model as well? To say, okay, we have strong power, and then we form something which leads for more than 200 years.
No, not at all. I think this is an illness of our dreams, our bad daydreams. We all like authority. Most people like authority. They love strong leaders. They want people to tell them what to do. I think this is bad for people. And I think it's bad to long for a strong city plan that will be... Because actually, let me say, it's a lot of nostalgia. Now we go back to Paris. We look back in Paris with a different eye. We don't remember that all the writers and intellectuals and philosophers and composers who wrote a petition against the Eiffel Tower. We love it. We think it's beautiful, but we don't remember that Tony Garnier and Dumas and Goncourt brothers and, you know, everybody wrote this will, you know, definitely destroy Paris. So I believe that cities are living. They have to move forward. They cannot be just operated by a single power source. And unfortunately, to become a successful architect, mostly you need to have an authoritarian streak. You have to, most architects are authoritarian. That's why Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin and Mao were all interested in architecture. When I was in Bucharest, I stood in front of the palace window, and he cut, you know, a street nowhere, just in the middle, just out of his window, destroying old churches, just so he could see the infinite perspective of his power. I think it's a wrong world to use as a model. We've had it, we've seen it. Read something of the revolutions in Paris. Read something about what people said, what suffering it brought. Now we can admire it, but it's a false admiration. Look, we admire the Colosseum. It's a beautiful structure. We don't think that here people were slaughtered. People were killed here. I think ethics is almost as important in architecture as aesthetics. Not the same. You know, you need to have the art of architecture, but you know what a building is built for, how it looks, who signs the papers, and what is the purpose of the building. I think I intertwined that. Have to do with moral ideas, definitely. Absolutely.
But for instance, if you're looking for your Jewish museum in Berlin, if it would have the social structure, the rights of the population to vote for new projects and all this, which we have now, if we would have had them in 1989, I think your project would have had a lot of problems.
It had problems
So
anyway.
maybe for
It had
art?
problems anyway.
Huh?
No, I'm a believer in participatory. If I could explain the building, not just to some powerful people make a decision, but to regular people, I think people would have been for it. Sure, I mean that there's a tone set for certain things by higher powers, but that's not always the tone. Look back in history; it's not always the winning sound.
But do you think that really everybody is able to follow, to read what you give us?
I think yes. I think people are very creative. I am against people who think that you have to talk down, people don't really understand. I think people, when it comes to architecture, I don't talk about literature, you have to have a certain level of reading comprehension. But if you go on a street, if you see a building, even if the building might disturb you, it might be outside of your horizon, it's an encounter that counts. And that encounter can be a very creative encounter, which doesn't mean that buildings should simply promote their own success. Buildings have to speak with their own voice. And we know that so many buildings that were built were not welcome. We know so many symphonies. I read a review of Beethoven's symphony. The symphony. The review was not a good review. How incredible for us. The most famous piece of music, the Mona Lisa of music, was not really welcomed when it was first performed. Okay?
How did you convince the critiques and so the music critiques at least, you can say about all the audience? I mean, for a musician, okay, he can play his thing. An architect has very few possibilities to go and convince people before he starts to build. So what are your techniques to bring the debate and to convince people, hey, my project is that what you want to have?
Well, I have to tell you an anecdote. This is maybe my book. At Ground Zero, the day when the decision was made in New York, the New York Times competition, or the competition for whose master and whose idea is going to be adapted, the headline of that morning, the two large flag headlines, was not me. Another team, another names of architects. And I opened that New York Times, you didn't have to open it, it was on the front page in letters that you could not miss. I looked at it, looked at it, said, okay, you have to do your best, that's the decision. But then at 7 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, and the head of Mr. Whitehead said, Mr. Libeskind, can you come down by 7:30 to Lower Manhattan because the mayor and the governor would like to see you. And I said, sure. It was early in the morning, just grabbed a roll of drawings, no computer, and as I was standing in one of the little rooms, I saw the other team going by, the winning team that has already been announced. They had won the competition. New York Times had proven, shown, then they walked and they made a pretty nasty gesture to me. The loser. They were a team of maybe 10 people. I was there only with Nina. And then the governor and mayor of New York, Governor Pataki and Mayor Bloomberg said, you can explain your project. So I opened the drawing and I said a few words. He said, thanks a lot. And I said goodbye. We went back to the hotel. We were packing because we were living in Berlin. And then the telephone rang. It was almost 6 o'clock in the evening. Nina picked up the telephone and said, it's for you, Mr. Whitehead. I don't know why you called me. And Mr. Whitehead said, Mr. Libeskind, don't believe what you read in the papers. You've just won the competition. So, sometimes you have to be lucky.
Are you drawing with pencil or with, nowadays all the drawings will be for the work will be done on the computer, I think.
Of course.
When you design a project, how are you doing it?
I do it in several ways. I love using the pencil and pen and brush and paint, but I also use the iPad. I recently did a testimonial for Apple because I have an app that allows me to draw really fantastic things on an iPad in complete freedom. So yes, I use the iPad is just a finger. There's no tool. They now made a tool, but I actually prefer the finger. Very primitive. Just the pressure of your finger can create a line, a color. But I'm a believer in the hand. and working with the hand. Of course, later on, you have to make a model, you have to translate it to computer language, and very sophisticated at that, in order to produce a building.
Are you still preparing your project with such fantastic models as we have seen at the end of the 80s?
Oh, yes.
Beginning of the 90s, or is it basically this thing?
No, really.
It's a nice little model, by
I
the way.
have to say, our models, if you come to our studio in New York, you'll see, it looks like a medieval workshop. People say, we don't have a normal hierarchy of experts who are doing models. Even, the architects, they like to build things, in model form, physically. So we, of course, have now new techniques. There's 3D printing and all that. But we love to make models, physical models, sometimes very large, where you can put your head into a space in a very traditional way and look like, hundreds of years ago, architects or people looked at models. So yes, we do produce a great number of models. It's not very cost effective, because it takes a lot of time, but it's due to love. If you love to do something, you stay up all night, and you want to see what this will look like in cardboard or wood and so on, yes.
Have you ever done an exhibition just on these models?
I have done some exhibitions, not just on models, but I've done exhibitions with drawings and models, certainly. Yes.
Maybe, I hope, maybe it will be next year in Łódź.
Ah, fantastic.
I hope
Fantastic,
so.
thank you.
I think there are some questions, maybe. Is there a, lift your hand? What we have, thousands or more? Okay. Can't be. No. Is it green?
Of course.
Just try to be an icebreaker, Christopher Marshall from Frankfurter. We have a fantastic story. I met him first time, not in Berlin, but in Denver, Colorado. And that is also the reason why I'm asking my question. Certain forms of architecture, are they bound in a certain way to the culture and the landscape, or are they international things? And I will now tell a very simplistic story. Here in Berlin, we all know your museum, and that it's the Jewish star which is broken, and you have all these edges and different forms.
Yes.
And then I came to Denver, which is at the chain of the Rocky Mountains, which are also mountains which are very edgy. And then I saw his museum edition in Denver, and I thought, some part of this reminds me of Berlin. Of course, it's a different explanation, but here again, all these edges, and in Colorado it was the Rocky Mountains, and in Berlin it was the broken Jewish
Look,
star.
I can tell you the answer that Mozart gave. Mozart was asked this question. It's in his notebooks. Mr. Mozart, why is it that your music, whether it's an octet or a symphony or a choral work, it always sounds like that? And he said, look at the shape of my nose. And he had a very big nose. I mean, Mozart had an amazing nose. I've studied it after I read that comment. Very complex. No. You are right. A building belongs simultaneously in a genius loci, a unique, sapphire could not be anywhere else. Could be only on that corner. It could not be on any other corner. It's designed to take advantage of views, of light, of the exposures, of its place. At the same time, insofar as the building is not produced by a committee of technocrats, but it's a work of civic art, it must contain something that is universal, that communicates across all the lines. And I think the answer to the question is both. It has to be very unique, and at the same time, it has to be also very, very unique to the person who's making it. And I think that was the answer of Mozart. It's in a funny way. He referred to his own shape, but I think it's true for every artist. Why I love the works of Frank Gehry, because they are Frank Gehry. Why I dislike the works of many corporate offices, because they are just second-hand realities. They eclipse the individual. They are just pretended works of individuals. They are works of collecting of average ideas. So sure, a work of art has to be unique, has to be uniquely cited in the place, has to connect to the culture of the place. But those connections are more subtle and more profound than we even know. There is a connection, believe it or not, between even Denver and Berlin.
There is if you're looking for the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, or not only the work, but the written work of his literature, or Alvarado, or Sullivan specifically, they very often tell us how strong they have worked in their offices to design a style. So not a style in a formalistic way, but they said, oh, we designed so long for our project up to the moment that it was really right. Sullivan and Alvarado.
Yes.
How are you doing it in your office?
Well, it's true.
By debating, or
No.
you cannot be the genius.
No. You have to debate with technical questions. You have to debate how do you do this, how do you do that. You have to be inventive and create sustainable buildings that really last. But at the end, it's really a debate with yourself. At the deepest level. I mean, Emily Dickinson, one of the great thinkers, not just a great one, she said there is a solitude of space, a solitude of sea, a solitude of death, but then society shall be. Compared with that unique sight, she meant the soul. The soul conversing to itself, she called it finite infinity. But anyway, I don't recite a complete poem, but it's really, that's the moment of truth. Moment of truth is that moment. It's not a debate about cost. It's not a debate about, do you like this angle? It has to be the right angle. It has to be the right condition of space. It has to fit. I guess that's the difference between something produced by a robot and something produced by someone.
Anybody has a question?
Hello, Mr. Libeskind. I'm Fabian. I would like to know if you keep one apartment for yourself in Sapphire.
If I were to consider it, I'm trying to convince my wife.
You're working in many places. You are also the person of few countries. So, what are differences when you work in Germany, in Poland, in the United States, now in Israel, in China?
Many countries, in every continent, in Africa, in South America. That's the beautiful thing about when you have a chance to work in a place, not just be a tourist. This is what I realized. Everywhere you go, when you're in New York, people think this is the center of the world. When I am in Kenya, they think this is the center of the world. Berlin, this is the center of the world. Even a small town in China, they think this is the center of the world. Suddenly you realize that they're mutually exclusive. The center must lie somewhere else. So yes, in a way that's true. Every place is the center of the world, but one has to see the world. Not miss the fact that we are in this world. And I think that we share all the issues because the sky, the earth, the rain, the weather are really speaking to us, not to neglect what we have here in common, that we are not really where we think we are. So yes, that's one of the advantages of working in many different places and meeting many different local people, local cultures, and understanding the ambition of each place and the gleam of light in each place. That's why the world is a beautiful place. It would be terrible if there was one center.
Mr. Libeskind, Berlin was having divided city in both parts of the city developed more than 50 years in different way, I think also in opposition to each other. You used to live here in the city. How much is this untypical situation of this town challenge for an architect?
It's a great question. When I designed the Jewish Museum, there was an emblematic Star of David, and in the center was the wall. But I said to myself, as I was drawing, I said, when it comes to the division of Berlin, it means nothing when it comes to Jewish culture. Nothing to do with East and West. It has to do with the Jewish culture of Berlin. It didn't matter about the post-war division of Europe and so on. It had to do with Berlin, with Berliners. So it's something fantastic that I was able to come here before the wall fell and experience what it means for a city to become free again, fully. And the world changed really overnight. I think that's fantastic, because as I said, freedom, liberty, those are to me not hollow words. Those are the words that I know that was important. And we know so many artists, so many people, so many writers who can, I'm speaking at the Pen Club in New York next week. And we know how many writers are not able to speak, who are arrested, journalists, killed, architects, not able to. So yes, I think that's why I actually love Berlin. Berlin has this complex history, tragic, irreversible, but also one with incredible hope and an example actually to the world what a city and what a country can do to come out of darkness into something that has kind of sense of the future for other people, not just people who live in Berlin. So yeah, I've been lucky to be here and to be part of it.
Do you remember how you felt the old West Berlin? I mean, you have seen it very short, but it survived a bit longer.
It was very interesting. As I came to Berlin, they were showing me the wall. You know, you walk, and they were pointing. That's the other side. That's. Then I realized I also was within the wall. I was on the other side of that wall, but also within a wall. So in a way, you realize that somebody else's lack of freedom affects your freedom. That's what I realized when I was first here. And it was, of course, a different Berlin. It was a totally different Berlin. By the way, when I competed in the Alexanderplatz competition, in which I won the 92, I think.
Something like that.
I was the only person in that competition who was not booed by the public. There were 5 architects. They were all booed to get off the stage. Like regular people came to. I was the only one who was applauded because I did not tear a single building down of the East. I think why would you tear down buildings of Alexanderplatz and replace them with, just leave everything as it, just add to it, improve the Kaufhof, put some, reduce the size of the wide street so that there is, a retail and a pleasure of walking on a good street. It was a symbolic second prize because politically the prize was already selected before, just like in New York, except New York reversed itself. But I don't think this is the wrong approach. I think you have to respect history in some way. Whatever happens has happened. And it's to work creatively with it that is so interesting in Berlin and in every place in history. Maybe not like Berlin.
Give it to you a good feeling now that you think, okay, after 20 years now, am I on the right side? And the development has proven that I was right, because at least there was very, very few things you build at Alexanderplatz, and all these things which will be built are in a scale of your idea.
No, in a way, I feel, I have the big model of Alexanderplatz in the office in New York, and I feel that's exactly what happened. Renovation of the hotel, small transformation here and there, adding, helping, kind of a realistic project. So yes, sometimes reality is more intelligent than jurors and politicians.
How was it, at least, this was, for me, it's always interesting when I see your project, when I'm going to Manchester, I see the Imperial War Museum, and I really have the feeling it's a very British building, in a way. I think, in a way, the Jewish Museum in Berlin is a very German building, not specifically the Felix-Nussbaum in Osnabrück. Much more maybe. The Royal Ontario, I don't know Canada enough to say it's Canadian, but is there an influence of the cultural history of the nation where you are building?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you can reduce it to the craft of building. Each place is a difficult place to build. People in Berlin think it's difficult to build in Berlin. People in Singapore think it's difficult to build in Singapore. People in New York think it's difficult, or anywhere you go. Even if you go to, I was recently, Saudi Arabia or farther in the Middle East, people think it's very difficult to build in those places. And it's true, because every culture is embedded in the way things are done. And it's unique. It's unique culturally, unique linguistically, unique. And you have to touch that chord somehow in order to build something. Otherwise, you just build something very, very artificial.
Are you controlling the fabric? So, and the way how to build?
Of course.
Or are you just doing the plan and then say, hey, let's do it?
No. I was just today, this morning in the rain, with Sister Sigrid and many other people, looking at a one-to-one sample of how the sapphire is going to look. And it's a technical examination. You have to make sure that what you're building is working on technical levels, in light, in the materials. It's not done on a piece of paper and then you send it away and it's kind of does it by itself. Those kinds of buildings, you can tell, don't have much spirit. I think building is about the spirit of a city. It's a word that most people don't believe in, actually. But you can see buildings that have been imported. They can be nice aesthetically. They can be photographed on top of magazines and shown on TV, but they are just artificial constructions. Versus buildings that are built from kind of within the history of the city, which doesn't mean mimicking the history, doesn't mean copying it, but using it in some really creative way through the way the building is built. So to answer your question, yes, it's very uniquely Berlin.
Do you like to come back to your places, to your buildings, to see them again and again in different way?
Sure. You come...
You're not afraid of them?
No. It's like, well, are you afraid to see your kids when they're much older?
Exactly.
Are you afraid to see... Yeah, you might have another kind of conversation, but it is it's kind of flesh and blood, and it has definitely architecture is not only an intellectual discipline. Too many people think it's something that you can read about, think about. It's actually ultimately the most emotional of all disciplines. I think Schopenhauer was right when he opposed it to music. He said, music is the most incredible because there's no material. It just registers. And architecture, with all its weight, is the opposite. But in a way, he made an equivalence between the two of emotion. And buildings without memory, without emotion, without that aspect, are just to be used, and they're gone.
But together with when you experience new things and you would like to change something, it is what I ask.
I have to tell you, if you want to change something in what you've done, you've made a terrible mistake. Because architecture is not mobile. It's not something like a painting. If you don't like it, you can take it off the wall and hang another painting. You can't change your wall. You have to, when you draw a wall, when you draw a window, you have to understand that it's something permanent, that is very stable. This is what I want to say to the audience. We know that in brain science, in DNA, in astrophysics, in economics, everything is changing very rapidly. The world is moving rapidly ahead as we speak. It's already changed 1 million times. But most people underestimate the importance of the stability of architecture, which is kind of also cosmic stability, because the cosmos, according to my son, who's an astrophysicist, still has billions and billions of years to go. Even though we know that it's moving apart slowly, how beautiful that we are involved as an architect in a field which has to do with stability, in a world which is very unstable. And that's something that one could think about. In a world of change, there is something that is immovable, that is unchangeable, which is your door handle, your door. You go into it. It's your space. It's your, it's your window. You can sit and watch the birds out of it. That's something that is often underestimated as we kind of rush through the information networks and information platforms.
Christopher Marshall once again, sorry. I'm still thinking about your response, what you said about the soul of cities, and that you have to be very careful whether not to erase something which is there, independent whether it's beautiful or not. It is connected to the soul or something like that, of the spirit at the moment. So what about historical reconstruction? Berlin and Warsaw at different times of the history have decided to reconstruct. In Warsaw it's the old city, and it was also going against the destruction of the time before. It was a statement to do it.
Yeah.
And now Berlin, we had this discussion whether we have to rebuild the former castle. And it's just a few hundred meters away from Alexanderplatz.
Yes.
So how do you decide on which parts of the city historical reconstruction might be part of the soul or not be part of the soul?
It's a great question you asked. Very difficult to answer quickly. But let's face it, there is no reconstruction. It's a construction. It is no reconstruction. It's just a construction of the castle. The castle in quotes, maybe the more in the Kafka sense of the castle. It's a castle. But it's not reconstruction. Reconstruction is something different. I renovated Aufbau the Baroque Alba or Gerlach, there's a building. It was maybe neglected partly, but it needed also to be loved, to be taken care of. Not as an imitation of the Baroque, but as a living building. So there is a balance. I understand Warsaw was completely devastated. It's a human need to reassert. We are here. We are going on. It depends where, but I don't think there's a general answer to this question. It depends really on the building, on the piece of the city. But I'm not a believer in imitation, in simulation. Pretending that we are playing music exactly the way Bach played, or exactly the way. Because art is always contemporary, it's always in the present. Even if it is hundreds of years old, it's experienced in the present. So I think it's been an illusion of many to think that they can bring back history by force. But we know that at the end, it's something different that is happening. It's a little bit like the ghost in Hamlet. He appears, the mask is empty, and he appears several times. And the whole play is about this ghost of the father and the disasters that are followed by the ghost. So, my good acquaintance, friend, intellectual colleague, Jacques Derrida wrote a whole book on Marxism as something being haunted by a ghost. The ghost is haunting Europe. That's a Communist Manifesto. But anyway, I think you can be haunted by ghosts. You can even try to bring them back to life, but it's not a workable formula, in my opinion. Looking at cities across not the last 50 years, but let's say 500 years.
Is it a strategy specific for traumatized society? Societies, it's not just only one.
I'm not sure. It's a hard question to answer. When you look how the Greeks built their temples, they provided in their temples an exact imitation the way a wooden temple was built. Because all those things carved have nothing to do with the way you construct stone. It's a memory of something done in wood. So there is a longing to bring back the past in a meaningful way. But how that is done, I think that's the question. Is it done in a creative way? Or is it done by opening up an encyclopedia of details and pretending that you have now entered the Berlin of the Kaiser and you've got the spirit and that's driving you? No, I think even though there were so many professors here in the city, I think this will not work.
Well, when you're looking in Warsaw, have you ever thought, this is a city of the 18th century?
No.
So when you
No,
walk through
it was always, to me it was always, I saw Warsaw, when I was a kid. To me it was also, my Warsaw, the Warsaw that was just coming back after the disasters. And that was beautiful, and it was built in concrete, and it was built prefabricated, and it was part of what it was. I'm not nostalgic to, at some point to reconstruct those buildings the way they were originally built. That was the time.
But I would like to ask you about Łódź, just because we are from Łódź, both, yes. So you wrote some once that it's a so strange city. What makes it strange for you? What is the city?
To me, it's strange that so many hundreds of thousands of Jews lived in Poland, in Łódź specifically, 1/3 of the population. There's hardly anybody there. That's the strangeness I feel as I walk through the streets.
Emptiness.
The clear emptiness. And there was such a rich city of politics, of culture, of art, of incredible mixing of Russians, of Germans, of Jews. That's kind of, you see the implications of fatal things in history, which take a long time to build back into. I remember, my father told me, he was interested in theater as a young man, and he worked in a Yiddish theater with the same director who was commissioning in Moscow, Libeskind. My father was never educated because he was born in the wrong time, but he had in him this constructivist, as an old man he started painting. And he never painted a still life, he never painted a landscape. He painted, a sharp wedge, a red line, a yellow triangle. And I always thought, it's kind of inborn where you come from. And, Łódź has amazing spirit, so I often think about these things. Where do they come from? Somebody asked me once that, your work is obvious when you see your father's work. I mean, he painted in his 70s, 80s, never went to school or class. He responded to my mother. My mother on her dying bed said, Nachman, you should do what you really love. You should paint. My father never painted before. And he took that seriously. And at the age of, 77, he bought a canvas and some brushes. And I was amazed that his paintings were radical. Kind of beautiful, not folk art, not anything like that. And then there was an exhibition in New York of his work, and one of my teachers, a very famous architect, came to us and he said, it's not about education, it's all in the genes.
I think with the genes, nothing is possible, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Libeskind. It was great to listen to you, to get a little bit closer to your views on architecture, society, history, and philosophy, and something more. I think you convinced all of us that architecture is not only about building houses, it's about society, about being put together. Thank you very much. We are honored.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.